I just watched Margin Call the other night. It's about the early moments of the 2008 housing crisis. It investigates how greed lay at the foundation of that recession. Banks tried to win big by offering as many mortgages as they could. Home buyers were happy to buy more house than they could afford. Eventually, people couldn't pay the mortgages that banks should have never offered them. Over 8 million people lost their jobs, and over 6 million homes were foreclosed due to this crisis. There's a poignant moment in the movie where a banker describes why banks continued giving people an unaffordable lifestyle.
People want to live like this in their cars and their big fucking houses they can't even pay for. Then you're necessary. The only reason that they all get to continue living like kings is because we got our fingers on the scales in their favor.
The idea is that banks should encourage people's greed. Why would a bank think otherwise? Greed is a function of economic growth.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed for life, for money, for love, knowledge, has marked the upward surge of mankind.
I can't help but wonder if we are repeating those mistakes all over again. These issues become especially troubling when we realize that greed even has the ability to destroy Earth, our only home. It goes without saying that the Earth's natural resources are diminishing. We are depleting all types of forests faster than we can grow them. Carbon emissions are heating up the planet. Coral reefs are dying, and we're all ingesting microplastics. It's easy to blame corporations for those issues, but their contributions rely on the demand of millions of consumers. Right now, I'm wearing clothes made from cotton. Pretty standard. But I wonder what the life of my t-shirt was like before I started wearing it. After a brief look, I found the likely journey these resources made before I bought them. While my tag doesn't specify, the United States is the leading cotton exporter, and likely grew the crop that produced this clothing. This shirt was made in Vietnam, meaning the product made an unnecessary, yet entirely financially reasonable lap around the globe before returning to me. These journeys our products make are commonplace. It all makes sense financially, but is environmentally irresponsible. The carbon emissions produced in the process are unsustainable. If we destroy our environment to make a larger profit margin on t-shirts, we have no more t-shirts to sell. Before that even happens, cotton would become more scarce and therefore more expensive. Our economy is dependent on our environment, and I think it should start acting like it. Surely there's a way to keep advancing technologically without losing our connection to the earth. What type of economic systems would we have if they sought to sustain natural resources rather than outgrow them? An interesting and somehow radical idea is to let resources dictate the flow of goods, not governments or markets. Consider starting by redrawing state boundaries. Instead of the sometimes arbitrary lines we currently have, we could use our available technology to ensure optimal relationship with the environment. The USGS has mapped the major watershed boundaries in the United States, and some of these regions follow along similar state lines. What if instead of the 50 states, we had these 20? Each state would then strive to sustain a population that could not outgrow the resources available in that state. We would start with water. Currently, each of the 50 US states has its own water laws. In Texas, for example, farmers own the water beneath their property. Consequently, they can pump as much water out of their property as they want. Take a look at the mighty Ogallala Aquifer. The aquifer stretches from Texas to South Dakota and supplies 30% of groundwater irrigation and $35 billion of crops in the United States annually. Right now, the Ogallala Aquifer is 91% depleted and will take 6,000 years to replenish. It's running dry in part because there is no incentive to take a responsible amount of water from it. Maybe we shouldn't depend on one region to produce such a large amount of food that is transported all throughout the nation and sold overseas. Instead, we strain one region until we mine it for all its resources, then depend on the next one until it is also depleted. If we followed the ecological demands of the region rather than the arbitrary demands of unknowing consumers, we could build a more lasting society. Consider this water, bottled in California and sold at a store in southern Utah. Isn't California in a drought? What are we doing here? I'm confused. What if we did our best to keep water and the things it produces within the watershed boundaries? What if money followed the flow of water? Our markets are already constrained by natural resources, but we act like they aren't. It's no wonder we have this toxic relationship with the stock market. We put up with the bear markets because of the bull markets. It fluctuates so rapidly because it is dependent on the trust of people, and people are fickle. My point is that if we cannot preserve our natural resources, we cannot have an economy that draws from them. Why don't we prioritize our natural resources by rooting our markets in something more stable than the trust of people? How about trying to align them with the natural processes of the earth?
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
Crises such as the housing market crash in 2008 show us how real collective greed can be. But after a quick government bailout, we all act like everything is fine and go back to servicing our every need. We quickly forget that natural resources are our only true economy. I know my idea is ridiculous and undeveloped, but I'm willing to throw something out there if it gets the conversation going. I'm just tired of having microplastics for dinner.
It's just money. It's made up. Pieces of paper with pictures on it so we don't have to kill each other just to get something to eat.